started this on Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday. And the more I read these, the more distant they seemed. And yet one thing stuck in my mind, and I think this is really what makes it pull together. Eschatology, big word. It's the study of the end times. And it is important concern of the final weeks of the liturgical year. That's right now. Last week, we heard about the 7 sons who gave up their lives because they wouldn't eat pork. And we have this week, a whole other set of readings that are a little unsettling. But they're preparing us because in 2 weeks, next week, is the Feast of Christ the King. And the next week is the first Sunday of Advent. And Advent is the beginning of the church year, the new church year. The whole cycle of readings changes. Everything is a bit different. And so we are now being prepared to move into that new cycle of readings and a new liturgical year. And so it's really appropriate that we look at the things that belong to the end time of this year. And we contemplate those in order to remind ourselves that Christ, as He promised, will come again. But we don't know when. And so, only Christ knows the day and the time when He will return to us. Now, one of Satan's best tricks, as C.S. Lewis says, is to convince us that we have plenty of time. Don't worry, be happy. Plenty of time. Really? How do we know that? Are we going to follow someone else's directive without any sufficient reflection on who we are and how we follow Christ and what that means to be a disciple of Christ? We don't know. And so I guess one of the major things is, you live every day to the best of your ability, and you don't have any regrets at that point. You've done all that you can, and that's what Jesus asks of us. Since God only knows when it's going to happen, vigilance is the hallmark of our understanding. It's the hallmark of our Christian living. So some people would say, well, Father, what does Christian living mean? Well, simply put, it means imitating Christ. It means listening to His Word, taking it to heart, and putting it into action. That's Christian living. There's no big secret. There's nothing really difficult about that except our willingness to embrace it. That's the difficulty. I couldn't possibly do that. That's too hard. What would I do? And you simply say, the foundation of faith says trust in God. Open your heart to God. Open your mind to God. And then simply do what He asks of you. Be vigilant. Be attentive to what's going on, the surroundings around you. Now, we well know that in our society, today and in years past, a lot of people have run into a number of challenges, some overwhelming, that they have been put out on the street. They've lost their homes. They've lost their jobs. They can't afford anything, and so they're out on the street. They become part of the homeless population. There are people who have simply enough money to either pay the rent or have food. If that was your dilemma, which one would you choose? Pay the rent, have a roof over your head, or buy the food and do the best you can? This is the reality of today's world. May not be our personal reality, but it's out there. It's out there, and it's not going to change. Not going to change. And so, as we look at these people that face these challenges that put them on the streets, at least from my understanding of following Christ and His words, is we have a moral obligation to minister to these people, to do what we can to help them. it's not just a nice gesture. It is, by Christian definition, a moral obligation to reach out and to do what we can to help these people in their time of need. And so we're there to help lift their burdens. Now, that's not to say that anyone in this room doesn't have a burden to bear, because we all do. That's a part of life. Life gives us challenges, and we can call them burdens, and we try to bear them as best we can. And don't we know that when there's somebody else who steps forward and says, let me help you bear your burden, we take a deep breath. We take a deep breath of gratitude for that person and for their commitment to come and to help us in our time of need. So, now if you think back to the passion of Jesus, all right, Jesus has been given the cross, he's been scourged, and he's on the way to Golgotha to be crucified. And what happens? Simon, the Cyrenian, coming in from the fields, is drafted to help Jesus bear his burden. And so Simon does that. Simon picks up that other crossbar, and he walks behind Jesus, helping him to bear his burden, knowing what's about to happen. But he can't turn away, he can't say no. And he walks with him and he helps him to bear that burden. When we help one another bear their burdens, we become Simon, but we also become Jesus. Because Jesus bore the greatest burden of his love for us by accepting the cross and opening for us the gates of eternal salvation. He bare that burden. And so, really, how can we do less? I don't have that answer. At least for me, it's like, it may not be convenient and it may not be comfortable, but I have to step forward and offer my support. Now, burdens need not be financial. Everyone thinks it's a financial burden. There are lots of other burdens that people bear. What if we could just spend time with or listen to someone who has lost a loved one and they're grieving, and they need a chance to talk about that. They need a chance to express their feelings. And oftentimes, that can't be done necessarily within a family structure, because if everybody in that structure at that point in time is having a bad day, your bad day and my bad day makes a really bad day together. But if there's someone else who can be there, a friend, someone you trust, who can just sit there and listen and be supportive, maybe that's all that's really needed. Maybe that person doesn't need advice. They just need someone to listen. Now, what about people? We all know people that are homebound. And the more chronologically gifted we become, the chances of being homebound or having doctor's appointments seems to exponentially increase. So if you know someone that's homebound, anybody in this room not have to go out and do your own shopping for the week? Of course not. So if you know someone who's unable to go out and do their shopping, wouldn't it be a lovely gesture to contact them and say, I'm going shopping. Is there anything I can get for you on my list too? Do you know what a relief that is for the person who can't do it? Do you know how much that relieves their anxiety and takes the pressure off? It's not hard, is it? You're going to go do it anyway. What about, how many of you people like to read? And if you like to read, and you're really good at putting expression into that reading, you might consider taking on the ministry of reading for someone who has no sight, someone who's blind. Reading for the blind is a great gift. And the reason I say that is I grew up with a blind aunt who taught me so much. We take so much for granted. She'd say to me, describe what's out there. Well, there's a tree. Well, how big is the tree? Well, it's about 30 feet. How round is the tree? Well, it's about 4 feet around. Well, what color are the leaves and what shape are they? She taught me fine detail in expression. And so when you read to someone, you put that expression and that emotion, and you bring to life a new aspect for them as they listen to what you're describing. Now, an hour a week, I think probably almost anybody can spare an hour a week. Find a way to reach out to someone who doesn't have sight and open up that vision for them. Doctor's appointments, unfortunately my prop isn't here tonight. I had Father Joe here this morning, who's sitting here, after rotator cuff surgery in his arm like this, and I said, it's not just for the chronologically gifted who need appointments to the doctor, that's the rest of us. It could be them too. And so Joe kind of sat there and he went, he was very generous. So you could drive to a doctor's appointment when someone can't get there. Now, how many of us have been hospitalized? And when we come home, if there's not someone there, or even if there is someone there who can't cook, wouldn't it be nice to have a meal come in that would be delicious and nourishing and heartwarming? So for those who like to cook, there are any kinds of opportunities to provide that food for someone coming home from the hospital who might not be able to get up and do that. So, is there a long list of opportunities? Absolutely. And what is this list limited by? Only your imagination. Only your imagination limits the list about how you can go out and bear the burden and help your sister or brother in their time. So today, as we celebrate, I'm going to ask us to open our eyes, our ears, our hearts, and our minds to the invitation of Jesus to not only serve Him, but to serve Him in serving one another, and to be vigilant in our service for God and for one another. And then, as we heard in the first reading, if we are willing to put ourselves out there and do that, then the promise that God has made will be ours and fulfilled. So today, think about how blessed you are, wherever you are in your life, and what kind of thanksgiving can you give to the Lord in your service of your sisters and brothers. Amen?
Amen.